My name is Jaipal Tuttle, and I'm an American. In 1993, I earned a PhD in theoretical physics. I was lucky to have worked with some of the most famous physicists in the world, but I knew I didn't want to be a professor. I came to Vietnam for a holiday in 1998, and from the very first day here, it changed my life. I knew I wanted to quit my job and move here, and one day, I found this.
Chị cũng nụ cười, kéo rượu nước mắt, khóc ngồi đồ xua, nỗi niềm thương đến mà đâu, thấy người nằm đó, dập vẹt còn xa, ào ào đổ lốc, rừng cây ở trung đường có hương bay ít nhiều.
And it really did change my life forever. Who knows? Maybe I was Vietnamese in my previous life.
Hello and welcome to Talk Vietnam. The man you just met in the previous clip has an amazing adventure from America to Vietnam thanks to this masterpiece of literary, The Tale of Kiều or Truyện Kiều. All Vietnamese know about this, but not anyone can understand as much as he does. This one has made him turn out alive as a physics professor, a quantitative trader, leave home in America to come here to live in Vietnam. And after 21 years, he has been accumulating deep knowledge about Truyện Kiều that even myself as a Vietnamese, I'm far from reaching it. And we're gonna find out how and why he has a special love for this one. Dr. Jaipal Tuttle, welcome to Talk Vietnam.
Thank you so much. And of course,
thank you for being here.
First of all, thank you so much for having me tonight. And of course, to the Vietnamese people, thank you so much for making my life special. Living in Vietnam for so long, it's been the most beautiful thing. Sure. I look forward to many years and of course, happiness and success for everybody.
Definitely, thank you. It's my pleasure to welcome you here. Well, amazing. First thing first, could you tell me about the first time you know about Truyện Kiều? And what was your first impression about this masterpiece?
So it's actually kind of funny. The first time I heard about it was when I started studying Vietnamese, and that was about 1998. Mm-hmm. And somebody mentioned it to me, and I thought, okay, interesting poem, whatever. I'm going to learn how to, order food and go to the airport and that kind of stuff. But the name always stuck in my head. Okay. And many years later, right, after I had already gone to university to study Vietnamese, and after I had private teachers, and I'd lived in the countryside where I only spoke Vietnamese every day, studied for years, one day I saw a copy of the book, and I remembered, oh, right, this is that book from so long ago I heard about. I picked it up and I looked at it, and I couldn't understand any of the words. It didn't make any sense to me. And I was scratching my head. I just couldn't believe that after studying so much, it was meaningless to me. And of course, it's because it was written in Chu Nom, right? The edition that I had picked up first had the modern Vietnamese alphabet, but the words were all Chu Nom. And Chu Nom is a totally different language. It's a Vietnamese language, but it's a very original 1,000-year-old Vietnamese language, and it's exactly the language Nguyen U used when he wrote Kiều. So I was so surprised, I was shocked. I just thought, okay, well, I need to understand this. And so all the years after that have kind of been shifting focus to try to understand Kiều in as many different ways as possible.
But which special part about Truyện Kiều that make you love it the most? I mean, the story or the way it was written?
Oh, it's fascinating. Of course, so first of all, it's a fantastic story. But it encapsulates what I would like to describe as Vietnamese-ness in it. And what I mean by that is the language that's used, the morals that are exposed, the ethics that are exposed, the history, the religion, the unique Vietnamese religion, the mixture of Confucianism, Buddhism, and dead ancestor worshipry. It's the most Vietnamese thing you can get. So the brilliance of Nguyen U was to take all that stuff and cram it into about 3,500 lines of 6-8 meter poetry with a very unique rhyming structure that goes all the way through.
Dr. Jaipal Tuttle used to be a professor of physics at University in California, US, before working on Wall Street with a group that was inventing how to use computer strategies for trading. It was a great business, but he knew he wanted more from life. He wanted an adventure. He came to Vietnam in 1998 and fell in love with the country. Dr. Tuttle then decided to quit his job and move to Vietnam. He enrolled in a language school, then later university, as well as having many private teachers. He got married to a Vietnamese woman and now he has 2 children. He has been living in Vietnam for 21 years and doesn't want to go back.
So after about, let's say, 21 years, like you said, come to Vietnam and learn about truyện Kiều, deep learning about this one.
Trying.
Could you explain truyện Kiều in a few sentences according to you?
Absolutely, I'll do my best, and it may not be the best.
Just give it a try.
But my best attempt, right, is it's a story about a young girl who's incredibly gifted and talented, and her family was a pretty average family. They weren't super rich, they weren't super poor. Things were going pretty good for them. Mm-hmm. She meets a guy that she likes, and she's very young, by the way. She's only 15 years old. She meets a guy that she likes. In secret, without letting their parents know, they decide that they're going to get married someday. But then a whole sequence of bad things happen. Her family is attacked by some people that kind of destroy all their belongings, and they're demanding money, or they're going to kill the father and the brother. Mm-hmm. So Kiều says, well, if my father and my brother die, then the whole family name will disappear from the earth. And there's a beautiful line where she says, essentially, if one flower falls from the tree, it's not a problem. But if all the green leaves die, then the tree dies. So she decides to sell herself, as she's thinking, to a pretty handsome, smart guy, a little bit older than her, who she thinks is going to be her husband. Of course, he tricks her. He wasn't really intending on marrying her. He's sent out by somebody to find girls to go work in a brothel. And then it gets much worse from there. Really bad things happen. Near the end, there's some redemption where she meets this fantastic guy named Tu Hai. He's a hero. And he falls in love with her and says, I don't care about your past. And this is, to me, one of the most beautiful things. He says, I don't care about your past. I love you. Let's live our life together. And they get married. And then, unfortunately, he gets killed. And then she tries to kill herself. And in the very end, she's saved and ends up kind of back with the guy she started out with, but kind of more as friends than husband and wife. What's amazing, though, is all through that whole story, which takes place over 15 years, by the way, there's this spirituality and specific spirit who keeps reappearing. Her name is Tiến, and she guides, she understands that Kiều has been marked as a soul with all these lives that happened before and all these lives that happen in the future. She's been marked as a soul that has a very cruel fate, and there's nothing she can do about it. So Tiến just tries to kind of guide Kiều along as best as possible, even though all these horrible things are happening. That's the best I can.
Wonderful summary. Thank you. I like it.
The Tale of Kiều has been translated into almost all popular languages and made accessible to a large audience in all major cultures around the world. According to Rainer Kraisak, a French researcher and translator, The Tale of Kiều by Nguyễn Du is truly a literary masterpiece, comparable to any great works in any other countries during any periods. Many statesmen also quoted some verses from The Tale of Kiều to express their understanding of Vietnamese culture and used these as a bridge to build friendship with Vietnam.
The great Vietnamese poet Nguyen Du had written, "Thank heaven we're here today to see the sun through the parting fog and clouds," because it is parting. We're here.
With his great works, Nguyen Du has been honored by the world. In 1965, he was honored as the World Cultural Celebrity by the World Peace Council on the anniversary of his 200th birthday. Not only English, but also Polish, French, Hungarian, German, Russian, Korean, and Japanese. The Vietnamese Tale of Kiều has traveled around the globe.
Truyện Kiều khi được dịch sang tiếng nước ngoài thì nó không còn là một cái tác phẩm văn học nữa, mà thậm chí nó là một cái hiện tượng văn hóa mà thế giới các cái dân tộc khác người ta rất chú ý, để người ta không những nghiên cứu văn học Việt Nam mà người ta nghiên cứu tính cách tâm hồn người Việt Nam.
Tôi rất là thích thú vì đó là một tác phẩm, một tiểu thuyết về cuộc sống rất là đau khổ, một con người đơn giản mà đã phải trải qua bao nhiêu đau khổ khổ nhưng mà luôn luôn lại còn giữ cho mình mất cái bản sắc riêng, cái đạo đức riêng và luôn luôn cố gắng là hoàn cảnh thế nào nhưng mà mình vẫn cố gắng làm con người chính đáng.
This love for the tale of Kiều has motivated many international academics to translate this Vietnamese work into different languages. Young Russian poet Vasily Popov has spent 2 years with a group of Russian and Vietnamese scholars translating the whole tale into Russian. They have recently published the first full translation of the story.
I love the tale of Kiều because I can see many similarities between Vietnamese and Russian souls. This literary work doesn't tell the story of one nation, it is for the world. Therefore, it should be translated into different languages. I'm in charge of transforming the translated version of Kiều into Russian, from a short story into poetry. This is the most difficult task. I faced many challenges when translating the allusions and metaphors used by Nguyễn Du into Russian.
Nhiều cái bản dịch thành công nhất cũng có thể vấp váp, bởi vì là nghiên cứu những cái mã văn hóa Việt Nam mà nó ẩn đằng sau những cái từ ngữ Nguyễn Du sử dụng. Nhiều khi là người nước ngoài ta không rành thì có thể dẫn đến những sai lầm.
These difficulties have actually sparked more academic interest in ensuring that translations more closely adhere to what Nguyễn Du really meant.
Rất là trân trọng các cái tâm huyết, các cái nỗ lực cố gắng của nhiều học giả, nhiều nhà nghiên cứu, nhiều nhà thơ nước ngoài. Họ muốn giới thiệu truyện Kiều mình sang cho các cái dân tộc khác. Chỉ đây là có thể nói là không những là cái niềm tự hào như là với tư cách là tác giả Nguyễn Du là một cái tác giả Việt Nam, và tự hào là văn hóa Việt Nam cũng có những cái đỉnh cao mà khiến cho nhân loại người ta quan tâm.
What characters that do you like most from truyện Kiều?
Well, Kiều, obviously, right? She keeps going on, facing so many terrible things in her life, but she keeps going and going and going, and has so many instances where she's thinking about ending it all, but just keeps on going, and in the end, things kind of work out for her. Tu Hai, obviously, for historical reasons, he was a real person, right? And for historical reasons, he was fascinating to study, but he was just this incredibly strong guy. He met Kiều, fell in love with her years and years after she had already been working in, brothel, Lausanne, right? So he said, you know what, I don't care. I love you, and I'm not perfect, and you're not perfect. I've done a lot I'm running around conquering southern China. I've killed a lot of people. I'm going to kill a lot more people. Right. And you've been working here, but let's fall in love with each other and treat each other with the most respect we can. And that's what they do. It's love triumphs all. So his character meeting her character, my favorite scenes in the book. And of course, when he dies, it's in my mind, one of the most beautiful things in all of literature, because when he dies, his body stands straight and his feet kind of turn to stone, and he's attached to the ground. The enemy soldiers are trying to push his body down, and when they realize they can't push his body down, all the enemy soldiers run away, and people on Tu Hai's side go to call Kiều to come, and Kiều eventually gets there, and she sees him, and she knows he's dead. She falls down on the ground sobbing, and then his body just goes and falls down next to her after standing immobile as if his feet were made out of stone. Wow. So those two characters together, they were, it's as beautiful as anything in Romeo and Juliet. It's perfect.
So what else did you find out about truyện Kiều? You told me that you found a original copy of the story that when you read it,
that's right.
He wrote truyện Kiều.
That's right.
Could you kind of elaborate on that?
Sure.
Story?
So what we know from the history of Kiều is that, and Nguyen Du's life, is that he traveled into China, and he was exposed to literature that he was able to read because he was fluent. He came across a book by the title of Tan Tâm Tai Tu, and contained within this book, it's the beginnings. It's the story of Kiều, but it's written as a story. It's not written as
a poem.
Okay. And what he did, the genius of what he did, is he looked at it, and this book's pretty good, but it's not great. He looked at it and thought, okay, I'm going to be inspired by this Chinese book, Chinese novella, short story. I'm going to be inspired. I'm going to write something that's going to encapsulate everything that is Vietnam, and embedded in that is the history and the politics that came before, leading up to when he wrote it, and the fighting between Nguyen lords and Trinh lords and the Tay Son Revolution. He took all of that from a pre-existing book and wrote it as 3,500-ish lines of Lukbat poetry.
Wow. But the story is the same.
The story is basically the same. It has almost all the same characters. They have the
characters are
same
same
names.
too.
The same events happen.
Can we say that Nguyen Yu did not come up with the original story, but he just changed the way to tell the story?
Yeah, but he made it much better. I mean, he took something that was basically an average story, right? And he made something that is comparable to some of the greatest works ever written, the classics, something like Tacitus, right? Historian Tacitus, who's one of the most beautiful writers, Shakespeare, of course. So, Nguyen Yu took the story and elevated himself to almost a godlike literary figure with his adaptation and his 6-8 meter poem. It's pure genius. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. He was an absolute genius.
According to the research of Dr. Tuttle, throughout Truyện Kiều, there are about 50 poems that are made reference to. Nguyen Yu mentions them, but he does not tell us what they were. He may say things like Kiều pulled her hairpin out and scratched a poem into a tree, but he doesn't tell us what the lyrics were. And the most interesting part is the full poems exist in Kim Vân Kiều truyện. Dr. Jaipal spent a lot of time looking for the original poems, translating them from Han Viet into contemporary Vietnamese and English.
So what are some of the interesting messages that are hidden that you found out?
There's 50 instances of the poems or so,
Wow.
roughly 50 instances.
So
and they start.
we're missing that much.
It's not missing so much as it's just adding. There's more to it, right? Starting in the very beginning, it's referenced as early as line 100, where she writes her first poem, and going all the way to the very end and spanning everything in between. There's two that really speak to me a lot, and one of them occurs very much in the beginning, and it's right after a scene where Kiều and her brother and her sister are standing on a road. They've already seen Dam Tien's unkept grave, and Kiều learned the story about Dam Tien's soul. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's a tornado, whirlwind, and the forest starts shaking, and the trees are going crazy, and the two girls and their brother are scared, and things calm down, and they can smell perfume in the air, but they don't see anybody, and they look around in the moss, and they see footprints, and of course it was Dam Tien's spirit coming to meet Kiều for the first time.
Yeah.
So in the book, there's a section in Han Viet, and I'd be happy to read it in Han Viet, and then
Give
in
it a
English.
try. I'd love to hear it.
It's in Han Viet, so it's going to sound funny. It's going to sound like
Okay.
words that don't make sense.
All right.
So I guess I should say, after this event happens, Kiều takes a pin out of her hair, runs over to a tree, and scribbles this down. And this
Wow.
is right. So it's Tây phong hà hốt cởi, trân trân su nhân ai, tham tiết nhiều hàm oan, Tây tan thủ hữu hoài, thừa loạn nghi xả cứu, hoa hạc nhà trung lai, bất đoàn hung hồn su, tung tung kịch ân đại. Right, so it's
All right.
Han Viet, right? So I've translated it into English, and as far as I know, it's the first time it's ever been
Okay.
presented anywhere. And it says, "Why does the west wind suddenly blow? Thunderous, it commands us to shake with grief. Bitter, as if harboring resentment. Desolate, as if weighed down by sorrow. A mounted phoenix has suspiciously arrived. A straddled crane retreated in doubt. The sweet fragrance of a lost soul remains, and while not staying in this world, she left footprints on the green grass."
Okay.
And that's kind of how it
So
looks.
could you explain
Kind of how it looks in Han Viet, and it
All
took a
right.
different color to do it in English.
Thank you so much. Could
So-
you explain it in plain English?
Yeah, so it's essentially exactly what Nguyen Yu has described. It's saying that they're standing there, and out of nowhere, the wind picks up, and the trees are shaking, and they're completely scared, and they're having these feelings that they just can't explain. When things calm down, they smell perfume in the air, and they look around and they don't see anybody, but they look down right next to them on the grass, the moss next to them, and they see footprints, which are Damtian's footprints. So, of course, Nguyen writes about that in roughly lines 120 to 124, and in line 123, Kiều writes this in the air, but these are the words she wrote down on the tree, even though you can't read it in the poem.
But what was the big picture at that time? If when you put this line into the poem, would that make a difference?
It would break the meter. I think it would break the meter. And it's kind of, he's already told the story once with 6/8 meter in the previous lines. He'd be kind of telling the story again. He wouldn't need to tell it again. But this version's a little deeper because it's referring to things in mythology of dead souls or flying around on phoenixes and cranes and things like that. So it's just got a little bit more mystical stuff to it.
Jaipal Tuttle has spent over 15 years finding the copies of Truyện Kiều at every old bookstore in Ho Chi Minh City. If someone says that a rare copy of Truyện Kiều is being sold somewhere, Jaipal would try to get there and buy it immediately. Jaipal usually drops by an old bookstore so that the owner remembers not only his face but also his favorite books.
Kiếm đề tài Kim Ngân Kiều, sau này em kiếm Phong Bùi Châu. Lâu lâu ông ghé có hy vọng là mua để đó giọng mấy cuốn sách cũ quá, giọng.
Without even thinking about it, he created one of the largest private collections of old Truyện Kiều books in the world. There are about 100 books in all, most written before about 1970, and some are more than 100 years old. Especially, he has a copy of a book the French author René Cailzac gave to Phạm Quỳnh in 1927.
This was a gift from a man named René Cailzac, who was a Frenchman. So Phạm Quỳnh, of course, was a very famous Vietnamese intellectual. Here's his autograph where he says it's for Monsieur Phạm Quỳnh, the director of the Nam Phong magazine. And to me, it's just beautiful.
I like hearing his stories about when he goes out into the city and when he finds rare books and stuff like that. That's what I enjoy, and I keep on wanting to see him succeed, get more books too.
Well, I think if he likes it, then I think he should continue doing it, and I think it's a really great hobby to have. I think it benefits him a lot because I think it's good for him to be learning new things every day and studying.
To Jaipal, this collection is very special as it helps him understand that the history lesson is in some way preserved in those books. He has made a promise to preserve books and made them available for others to study in the future.
You're not just studying Truyện Kiều. I know you are also a collector. Collectors of different versions of Truyện Kiều as well. And we have seen in the report that you show us a lot your collection at home.
Yeah.
Could you kind of introduce some of the most interesting ones here?
Sure. Sure. So along the way, as I realized the value of Kiều, not as like an investment value, but in terms of its cultural value, I decided that I was going to buy every old book that I could find. And I started out cleaning out all of the used bookstores in Ho Chi Minh City, and then I talked to the owners and said, if you can find any other old books, I'll buy them. Okay. And again, not as an investment. I'd eventually like to donate them to a foundation, a creative foundation, donate them. But I have a quite large collection of rare books. This is really one of my favorite. This was written in 1951, and it's just page after page after page of Kiều. It was originally handwritten. There's no notes. It's just starting on line 1, going all the way to the end. It's just...
Wow, that looks rare
Kiều.
To me.
Yeah, there's...
I see the little mark hidden on the page,
Each
right?
page, I don't know if we'll be able to see it, but each page has a dragon watermark in it. If you hold it up to the light, there's a dragon. And the texture of the page, it's not...
That's rare, yeah.
It's not like that paper. It's very coarse. and I'm assuming they wrote it by hand originally and etched it somehow into a metal plate. This is much after wood plates, and then they pressed it. And not many copies of this one were made, but to me the thing that makes this one so beautiful is inside it has 4 watercolors that come along with it. And so here's one of them. It's Kiều meeting the boy that she fell in love with at first, and they're meeting at this wall.
Nice picture, right there.
Yeah, it's just
Wow.
it's beautiful in its
Does
simplicity.
that come with the book as well?
Yeah, this book as
Wow,
it was
must be so rare.
as it was
Yeah.
published. This one, I think 1,000 copies were printed in 1951, and they all contained these watercolors. Here's a later one when Kiew's already had a pretty rough time in life, and she's meeting a Buddhist nun who helped her quite a bit through her life. And it's just an interaction they had together. But again, just beautiful, beautiful watercolors. Here's one where she's playing lute for, and actually I'm not sure if this is her second husband or if it's for the first love, Kim Trong, because there was actually kind of a little bit of scandalous thing where she went to go visit him while her parents were at a party. And it was.
I like that picture a lot.
It's beautiful, right?
Nice, yeah.
Yeah, I always want to learn how to play one of these instruments,
Wow.
but I never could. But
Yeah, I could hang that on my wall. Yeah.
yeah, it's beautiful, and then
The color looks nice
and
too.
it's so simple, right? It's so there's so little to it, but it's so powerful, right? And the color and the brushwork, the artist who made this. And the last one, it's actually my favorite. So this is where Kiew's first boyfriend, Kim Trong, has to go on a very faraway journey, and he's riding through this kind of desolateness. There's so few colors here, so little action in the photo, yet it's so powerful.
Truyện Kiều was originally written in Nôm script, which is Vietnamese ancient writing system partly based on Chinese characters. As Dr. Tuttle wants to dig deep into the meaning of Truyện Kiều, he is determined to study Nôm script by himself. About 5 years ago, he began to buy books that described the grammar and the structure of classical Chinese, particularly poetry. Then he bought as many old dictionaries he could find. His goal is to read and know the meaning in context of perhaps the 1,500 Nôm characters that show up most frequently in Truyện Kiều.
Let's talk about your experience learning chữ Nôm.
Sure.
Nôm script, I
Yeah.
believe, is so difficult.
Yeah.
How can you differentiate a Hán script from a Nôm script?
Right. Well, I would still categorize myself as a beginner, right?
Okay.
In terms of reading chữ Nôm when it's written with the modern script, not the characters, it's kind of easy. But when you're looking at the characters, after you start to read classical Chinese, traditional classical Chinese, the characters start to look familiar. Even if you don't know what they mean, you can start to piece together, okay, this one has to do with water, and this one has to do with a roof over your head, and this one has to do with something sprouting out of the ground, radicals. And with Nôm, the way that it was the brilliance of the Vietnamese 1,000 years ago to invent a new language so they could continue to have written language and keep that a secret, they started modifying things, right? They started tweaking things. So sometimes you'll see a Nôm character and you'll just think, okay, that doesn't look right. It's got the wrong radical. It's got the wrong thing that kind of tells you what family, like this one belongs to water, this one belongs to something sprouting out of the ground. And you'll look at it and it just doesn't look right. And then when you see a whole bunch of them together, when you see something that's written in pure classical Chinese, and then you see something written in Nôm next to it, there's something about it, it just doesn't look right. And I'm by no means an expert. There are people who are fantastic at it, and a great resource is gnomefoundation.org, which is a tremendous resource. And of course, old dictionaries. I use old dictionaries all the time, very old dictionaries.
What do you think about the creativity of the Vietnamese when turning Hán script to Nôm script?
Oh, it's fantastic, right? Because they did it. They did it not only to remain literate, but they did it to hide information. They used it to transmit military strategy, right? So they could write something on a scroll, tie it up, some guy could go running.
Yeah, there's nobody
you
can
know,
understand, right?
and maybe some kind of enemy would find it, open it up, and they couldn't read what it was, and then they'd probably do something bad to the person they took it from. But they could hide military information. It was brilliant, right? It's almost like a game kids would play where they're inventing new words, right? So inventing new words, kids love doing that, right? But instead of doing a handful for fun, the ancient Vietnamese, and by ancient Vietnamese, we'll call it 1,000 years ago, they invented thousands and thousands. They invented 10,000 or more new words to use as their language, their written language.
The love for truyện Kiều urged Dr. Tuttle to meet experts who have loved and shed tears over the stories of Kiều and her heartbreaking cries of sorrow, just like he did. One of them is the journalist and author, the people's poet Chính Văn. At the age of almost 90, Chính Văn has extensively researched truyện Kiều, contemporary literature, and literature of the 18th to 20th centuries. He is a friend whom Jaipal is always very happy to meet ever since the first time.
Một người nước ngoài nào đó mà yêu truyện Kiều, yêu Nguyễn Du, đi qua Việt Nam ở lại rất lâu, rồi học Hán văn, học cả chữ Nôm, rồi tập nói tiếng Việt để thưởng thức một cái án văn số 1 của Việt Nam mà bây giờ đã được nhân loại thừa nhận như thế, thì rất là cảm ơn. Nhân danh tôi và nhân danh người Việt Nam, nhân danh những người yêu văn học nghệ thuật, cảm ơn bạn mình.
What do you think are the timeless values of truyện Kiều that have been enchanting the whole world until today?
It's a story of sorrow. It's a story of love. It's a religious story. It's a story about morality. It's a story about ethics. It's a story about history. It has all of it put together. And it's such a beautiful story about a young girl who has many terrible things happen to her. You can't even begin to imagine how bad they were. Yet she still survives and goes on to live, again, a relatively normal life afterwards. So it's all about kind of love and sorrow and redemption and more love and more sorrow and then a lot more sorrow. But then in the end, everything's okay. And so I think people all around the world in every country can appreciate that story. I guess we love reading about love is good, love is bad.
Yeah.
Love gets really bad, then everything's happy in the end. So but then the context, the depth, the Vietnamese-ness, right? Vietnamese-ness of Nguyen Du's brilliance. Like we were saying, any language you read it in, it's still beautiful. It doesn't matter what language it is.
But for you, what would be the most favorable lesson that you can learn from truyện Kiều?
I think it has to go back to Tu Hai, meeting Kiều. And he was not a great guy. He was doing a lot of fighting, and he commanded kind of rogue armies. He was kind of a tough military guy, and again by that time her life had really hit bottom, although it got a little worse. That instance, that piece, the message of forgiveness and love. I can't think of any other literary work where you have two people who really should have no reason, whose lives have been in kind of chaos or despair, almost no reason why they should meet each other and fall in love. The most probable thing was he would have found out about her and they would have fooled around a little bit and he would have gone on his way conquering more stuff. But instead they fell in love with each other and they were just like, okay, we'll go forward and we won't look at the past. And that as a message that should go out to everyone, everywhere in the world.
Wow.
It's the future. The past things are sad and sorrowful. Sometimes past things are great and the future becomes more difficult. But if you're just absorbed in the past, your life doesn't really go anywhere. And years go by and then you're gone.
Thank you for the lesson.
No problem.
So right now, are you still doing research on truyện Kiều? And
oh yeah, every
what
day.
is your plan right now? What are you trying to find out?
Well, I'm still working on the poems and for me, the challenge is I was never educated in classical Chinese, so I'm trying to figure it out as I go along. And so long as I can have Chu Han and Han Viet and a bunch of old dictionaries, some old dictionaries here, a bunch of old dictionaries, I can go word by word and then figure out what's going on. So I spent a lot of time with a bunch of dictionaries, studying the old poems. That's just my own personal research, but what I'd really like to see happen with Kiều is I'd like to create an institution, create a foundation where people who want to study Kiều can either use books from my collection, or I can provide information for them, how to learn about it. Something that's not attached to university. I've had enough university in my life already. I don't want to be a professor. I want to provide an environment where future generations, young Vietnamese, old Vietnamese, anybody who wants to study Kiều has resources and materials to do. So I'd like to set that up.
What do you think we could do to spread out the word, the messages about truyện Kiều for the young generation? How do we create the interest from them for this one?
I think, to me, it's really having younger people understand how special it is to Vietnam and how it, again, I like to say Vietnamese-ness. It really encapsulates what does it mean to be Vietnamese, because the story is definitely not about another country, right? Everything that's inside it is about Vietnam over the course of centuries. And so it's, as we talked about before, it's a history book, it's a love story, it's all these things put together. So I think if young children can appreciate that, how important this book was, this poem is, to Vietnamese culture and how it is Vietnam, hopefully a few more will read it.
Jaipal Tuttle is very close to his children. Whenever at home, the whole family is sharing quality time together. His son is with his music. Here is where Jaipal often shares the lessons from truyện Kiều to his children. The lessons inspire them a lot, especially the forgiveness and loyalty.
I think he's very, very interesting, and I think he loves to study, and he's very smart, and he's sometimes a little bit silly, but I like him.
In his free time, Dr. Tuttle often takes his kids to pagodas and temples and teach them about the Han and Nom scripts that he have learned. This gradually instills the biggest inspiration of his life, truyện Kiều, into younger generation.
You said you want to popularize truyện Kiều all over the world. How do you plan to do that?
That's a good question. I don't. Luckily, I'm old, but I'm not that old. So I'm hoping that over the next number of years, I'll figure that out. What I'm very interested in doing is, and again, we kind of briefly touched on this, is figuring out how to use social media where people who normally would never connect with each other, kind of maybe people who are random strangers, even in different countries, can comment on Kiều or learn about Kiều or say why they love it or why they hate it. Maybe have it open for debate, maybe not have it open for debate, but have them interact with each other. And I think, going forward into the 2020s and 2030s and beyond, there's no way to popularize it without it being integrated fully into social media somehow.
Yeah, social media and
it has
young
to be.
people.
Yeah, because otherwise, the kids, my kids included, they'll just be pounding away on their phones.
You have to do it with your kid first before you do it with young kids out there.
Well, they're still too young, right?
Okay.
And again, part of the problem.
No, I'm joking. Yeah.
Yeah, part of the problem I think now is there's just no time to study it in middle school. Both my kids are, one's in middle school, one's in high school. There's just not enough time in their day to study it. They work and work and work and work and work, and then they pick up their phones and start social media.
So what's the plan now for truyện Kiều?
Plan is going to be to keep working on the poems. I've just scratched the surface. The more Tu Han and Han Viet that I learned, the more I can understand the poem. So each pass through, they seem to make a little bit more sense. So working on that, working on creating a permanent home or some type of foundation for my book collection, and then figuring out how to engage young people, as we were just talking about, with somehow something involving social media.
Well,
which I'll leave
definitely social media. Keep doing it, and I guess we can inspire them. Yep.
I hope so.
Thank you so much for your story.
Thank you very much. It's been fantastic.
Wow. Thank you. That's the story of Dr. Jaipal Tuttle, who left America to come here in Vietnam to live for almost 21 years and express the love for truyện Kiều, or the tale of Kiều, one of the most important masterpieces of the Vietnamese literature. And I want to quote Phạm Quân, if Kiều exists, our language exists, and if our language survives, then our country will survive. And I hope that the young generation of Vietnamese, we will show more appreciation to truyện Kiều as what Dr. Jaipal Tuttle has been doing. And that's it for Talk Vietnam today. My name is Quốc Khánh, and I hope to see you next time.